Today is Sunday, Chavdala Tevis. Welcome back, Rebbe Lozer. It is the yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe, and welcome back, Eddie.
That's an afterthought.
Chas v'shalom.
You didn't know you're gone.
That's right. Chavdala Tevis, it's the 200th yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe. It's a great, special day. And Bashgacha Protis, we're learning in Teres Menachem Sefer Mamar Tavshin Yud Aleph Tavshin Yud Beis, the Mamar of Shabbos Pashas Mini Pashas Para, Zos Chukas Hatorah of Tavshin Yud Aleph. And the Rebbe here discusses the concept of Ratzav V'Sheiv. It's Ashgacha Protis because this idea of Ratzav V'Sheiv is not just another idea in Chassidus, not to Chas v'Chalila minimize any of the ideas that are articulated in Chassidus, but Ratzav V'Sheiv happens to be one of the most fundamental Nekudas, one of the most fundamental ideas in Chassidus. And this is not something that I am just saying because that's the way it seems to be to my mind, but I will actually quote to you from what the Alter Rebbe himself says. The Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah in Parshas Chukas, I believe it is, he says as follows, and I quote, that the Ratzav V'Sheiv is Kol Iker HaTorah V'HaMitzvahs. That's a direct quote from the Alter Rebbe. This concept of Ratzav V'Sheiv, going out of yourself, going out, this idea of leaving and Sheiv, returning, is Kol Iker, the entire main idea of Torah and Mitzvahs. That's a very powerful statement. So it seems, obviously, that Ratzav V'Sheiv, this concept of running out, running forth, being drawn out and returning, is very, very central to Torah and Mitzvahs. In the Maimer, let's start with what the Rebbe says in the Maimer. In the Maimer, the Rebbe says that if we look at, first of all, what's the source of Ratzav V'Sheiv? What's the source of this term? Where does this term come from? The term is a pasuk in Yecheskel. The prophet Ezekiel, chapter 1, verse 14, pasuk Yudalet says, "V'hachayis Ratzav V'Sheiv k'marei habozok." Yecheskel, when he describes his vision of God's celestial chariot, he describes the images that he saw. What did he see there? And he says that he saw the angels, the Chayes HaKodesh, the holy beings, which is the reference to a certain level of angels, as we say in Kedusha, V'Efanim, V'Chayes HaKodesh. He saw them, Ratzav V'Sheiv, rushing forth, rushing up, and returning. Kemarei HaBozok, like the image of a flash of light that appears and then disappears. That's in Yecheskel. There's also a quote in Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, which is one of the earliest books of Kabbalah. Some say that the author was Avram Avinu. I believe others even say it was Adam Harishon. You're going back very, very early on, the Book of Formation. It says over there, Imrotz libcha, if your heart rushes, if your heart runs, shuv le'echad, return to the one. This is the quote of the Sefer Yetzirah as the Alter Rebbe quotes it. There are different versions. Another version says that Imrotz libcha shuv lamokim, Imrotz libcha shuv la'acher. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya in Perek Nun, chapter 50, quotes it as Imrotz libcha shuv le'echad. That's from Sefer Yetzirah. So again, we find this idea of Rotz, leaving and returning. And you find it in Sefer Kabbalah, in the Ramak you find it actually in Moreh Nevuchim, where the Rambam, the guy for Perplexed, he discusses the idea of Ratzav V'Sheiv in explaining what this whole idea meant to his Talmud that he was writing. the men of the Vuchim, and so on and so forth. You find this idea of Ratzav Hashem recurring as a recurring theme.
You find it very much with davening also. Mind runs away and you've got to bring it back.
Absolutely. And this is the point that I'm going to try to articulate here in the short time that we have. What's this centrality of Ratzav Hashem? Why does the Alter Rebbe say this is Kol Iker HaTorah VaMitzvos? This is the entire main aspect that encapsulates, that is a thread upon which, or a foundation upon which all the Torah mitzvahs are based. First of all, which one is the desire? First of all, again, you find this idea of Ratzav Hashem in all of creation, at every level. You find it in the angels, as we just explained. The Rebbe, we also find it, as we discussed, you find it in the earth. It's a scientific fact that the earth breathes. If you look at the seasons, for example, what happens when in the spring, when everything starts to grow again? What is that? It's the vegetation actually draws in carbon dioxide. That's what greenery does, right? What happens when the vegetation dies? It gives out carbon dioxide. It exhales, right? You find that in every creature on the world, the human being, animals breathe. The heart contracts and expands, right? We find it, as we just said, in malachim, in angels. We also find it in the life force of everything, which is in fact the reason, because we know Chassidus, Nishtal Shalom Hem, everything stems from the spiritual dimension. So because in the Chayas Eliki, the godly energy that God has given into the world to sustain the world, there is this idea of the Ratzav Hashem in the life force itself. Therefore, everything that comes from the life force mirrors that.
You see it beautifully on the tides. The tides
Correct.
come, or even the waves on the seashore, they come
And they return. Precisely. And you'll find this theme recurring. Emotionally, we have moments of ecstasy, joy, then we have moments of relaxation. We are awake and we sleep. We live, we die. In fact, the Alter Rebbe in Perek Nun of Tanya explains this idea of Al Korcha Chatachai and Al Korcha Chatameis in the concept, in the context of Ratzav Hashem, going forth and returning. So Ratzav Hashem is a very, very central and not only essential, but it's embedded within the very essence of all of existence.
Do you think it connects with Ratza to Ein Sof and Shuv to Ayin?
Yes. I mean, at the core of it, what's Ratza V'Shuv? Ratza is rushing forth to Ein Sof, and Shuv returning back to yourself. Yeah. If you take a look, for example, in Avodas Hashem. In Avodas Hashem, in serving Hashem, we have two opposing modes. In fact, this is from the Zohar. The Zohar says there's a very interesting Zohar that says like this. Rabbi Yitzchak, who was one of the Tanoim, says, one pasuk it says, Ivdu es Hashem, it says in the pasuk, Ivdu es Hashem biyira v'gilu birada. Serve Hashem with fear and be joyous with trepidation. Another pasuk says, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, boyo lefanav b'nana. Serve Hashem with joy, come with Him in song. So he says, this is a contradiction. On the one hand, it says you have to have fear. On the one hand, says you have to serve Hashem with fear, or you have to serve Hashem with joy. Which one is it? So he says that in every service of Hashem that a person approaches, he has to start with yira, with fear, and then he comes to the idea of joy. The Mishnah, Ein oimdim lihispalel, ela mitach keved rosh. Before you start davening, you have to have that serious contemplation, putting yourself into the right mode, and only on that foundation can you go ahead and start serving Hashem. What does the Alter Rebbe say in Perek Mamar Vayedaber? Reishis ha'avodah v'ikara v'shorsha. What is the foundation of Avodas Hashem? Serving Hashem? Kabbalah Sel. And then, of course, you also have to serve Hashem with joy. But you can't start with joy. What happened to Nadav Avihu? Why did they expire? Because they did not have the proper hachana. They did not have the proper preparation of what? Of tempering their ecstasy and founding their ecstasy on Yiras Hashem, on this Keved Reish, on this Kabbalah Oil aspect. right? When we come to educate children, certainly the previous Rebbe and the Rabbeim of Chabad expounded this again and again. When you the basic education of a child is emunah. You start educating a child with emunah. Believe in Hashem. Why? Because the yesod, the foundation of everything, is the emunah. That's the shuv, right? And when you have that foundation, then you can have the contemplation and the questions and starting to learn deep Chassidic philosophy to try to understand and so on and so forth. But you have to start with the emunah. When the Yidden received the Torah, what did they say? Naasa v'nishma. The first point was the naasa. That's the shuv. V'nishma represents the ratzon, right? Now this is not so simple, because in fact there were other Talmidim of the Magid who held differently.
Why is it then we call it Ratza v'shuv, not Shuv v'Ratza?
It's a good question, and in fact there are two terms that describe this idea of Ratzu v'shuv. One is the one that we're using now, Ratzu v'shuv, going out and returning. There's another one called Moti v'loy Moti. That's another term in Chassidus.
The angels went up the ladder and then they went down.
It depends on the perspective of the one that is Ratzu v'shuv, the one that is going out and coming back. For us, being beings of the lowly world, what represents to us what's our natural state? Our natural state is to be down here, the shuv. We're in a shuv mode, right? For us to go out of ourselves is ratzu. So the shuv is the natural state of where we are, right? For the upper beings, their natural state. So in other words, the question of if it's milmata l'mayla, from below to above, or from above to below. So that's why it's the idea of ratzu v'shuv, because our natural state is shuv. However, this is not as simple as it sounds, because there were other Talmidim of the Magid who held. So what's the desired state? That's the question. What's the desired state? The Alter Rebbe clearly says, as we will see, and as we do see, that he says that the desired state is the shuv. The ultimate purpose is the shuv, the returning. There were other Talmidim of the Magid, for example, Rabbi Elimelech of Lizensk, and Noam Elimelech was one of the greatest Talmidim of the Magid of Mizrich, says that the person should strive to leave. He saw the ultimate goal is the Rotzu. He says like this: that it's fit and proper for a person to be in a permanent state of burning up with love to Hashem without stop. Constantly burning up with love to Hashem. The idea of Rotzu. And he saw the Shuv, the constraints of the Shuv, of the returning, as something which holds you back. And in the battle of the Rotzu and the Shuv, everybody agrees there's a battle between the Rotzu and the Shuv. There's this dichotomy. He saw the challenge in breaking away from the Shuv and expiring within the Rotzu, being in a state of Rotzu. Building walls around yourself to protect yourself from the environment, from your physical environment, your mundane environment, and rather to become more spiritual, more angelic. That's the way Rebbe Melech Lizensk looked at it.
Every example that you gave earlier was a movement from one to the other and back again.
Oh.
So it's not one static state.
Correct.
It's movement all the time.
Movement.
It's a vibration.
Precisely. But the question is, in this process, what's the tachlis? Where are we
We're
going?
lucky if we move at all.
Yes, but that's the power of a neshama. Neshama has the ability to rise out of its constraints. But what's the tachlis for the neshama to rise out of its constraints and to expire? So Rabbi Melech Lizensk said yes. The Alter Rebbe came along and said no. The ultimate purpose is the shuv. And in this process, so we have a problem now. So according to Rabbi Melech Lizensk, what's the purpose of the shuv? If the idea is to expire, to connect to Hashem, to burn up with love to Hashem, what's the shuv? The shuv is that element which gives you the friction, the launching pad, as it were, to break out from something. To break out from that. It's because of that resistance that causes the person to try to break out, because it's because when the person feels that he's distant from Hashem, that he suddenly has this built-up pressure that builds and builds and builds and builds, like a catapult, right? Like a fighter jet taking off from aircraft carrier, where you have the resistance that holds the plane in its place, and you have that screen behind it where the thrust is pushing against it, and that resistance builds up to such a strength that once it's strong enough, you let go of the hook that holds the plane, and it takes off with unbelievable force. That's the shuv, according to the Melech of the Zens. The Alter Rebbe says the purpose is not the rotzu, the purpose is the shuv. So why have the rotzu? Shuv means coming down and operating in your environment, like the famous story with the Tzemach Tzedek, when they once told the Tzemach Tzedek that the Alter Rebbe had this silver, he had this tabak, this little snuff box of silver. It had no cover. What happened to the cover? The cover was, the Alter Rebbe, it was very polished silver. The Alter Rebbe used it as a mirror for his tefillin, to check if his tefillin are straight. So when they told over the story in front of the Tzemach Tzedek, somebody said that the Alter Rebbe broke off the cover and used it as a mirror. Tzemach Tzedek said it's not characteristic of the Alter Rebbe to break anything. He wasn't into breaking things. He didn't break himself and he didn't break others. Probably, he says, there was a pin that held the hinges together, and all he did was remove the pin and he removed the lid. So the Rebbe explains this word beautifully. He says the Alter Rebbe's inyan wasn't to break. The Alter Rebbe's inyan was to influence, to transform. Right? So what's the idea of shuv? The idea of shuv is coming back and operating in your environment, whether it's with yourself or your immediate environment or with the world, and transforming the world, working with the world and lifting it. So if that's the case, what's the rotzu for? What's the rotzu for? Because if we get too involved in our environment and we forget where we come from, we could suddenly become, as the Rambam says, ha'adam hu medini. A person is a social being. A person is influenced by his environment. So if all you have is the shuv and you're detached from the rotzu, one could run the danger of becoming like one's environment. Rather than influencing the environment will influence them. So you need that, as you say, that in that cycle, in that vibration, the rotzu. But in our subconscious, we always know that what is the ultimate kavanah? What's the tachlis kavanah? What's the ultimate purpose? The shuv. So you have these two opposing factors, and the idea is to get the balance right. On the one hand, to have the rotzu, but at the same time to be aware that the ultimate tachlis is the shuv, and therefore when you return in the right way, and you're able to influence your environment. You know, the Alter Rebbe, there was nobody more than the Alter Rebbe who knew what rotzu is. You know the famous word of the Alter Rebbe, he said, Mi li bashamayim v'imcha lechafatzti, I don't want your Gan Eden, I don't want your Elam Haba, I want but you alone. We know the Alter Rebbe used to go into such states of ecstasy, he used to roll on the floor. There's a sefer called, a sefer Mamar of the Alter Rebbe, which was written, the Hanochas, the texts were written down by one of his chassidim called the Pinchas Reizes. Famous chassid, I'm not going to go into all the details now, very, very famous chassid, a giant in chassidus. There are certain parts in the Mamorim where you see where there's like empty spaces, brackets or empty spaces. Why? Because the Pinchas, when the Alter Rebbe used to say a maimer and he used to go into ecstasy, the state of his pilus, he used to start rolling on the floor. And the Pinchas would roll after the Alter Rebbe to hear what he was saying. He every little detail he put into there. There was a story told that the Alter Rebbe was once davening in shul and he held on to these what are they called? You know, when you have a railing and then you have the pieces of wood going downwards. What are they called? You know, in the railing you have the top pieces of wood and then you have the spindles coming down. The Alter Rebbe was holding on to these spindles by davening. He went to such a pilus, he pulled out two of them and he was walking around the shul with these two spindles davening. The Alter Rebbe, when he wrote, it says Chassidus, he couldn't write the word Atzilis. He used to write Aleph Tzadik Yud and an apostrophe because he was overcome with a tremendous inspiration. So the Alter Rebbe, and in fact his family they made in his room padded walls that he shouldn't hurt himself when he goes into the state of ecstasy. And Dafke the Alter Rebbe is the one that said that what's the ultimate purpose? The Shuv. There's a story told, I want to share it with you. In Sefer HaNigunim, you know the Alter Rebbe wrote 10 Nigunim. One of them is a Nigun. It's Ke'ayel Tarik V'hoyel T'tofis. So it says like this: the famous chassid, the famous chassid Reb Shmuel Greinem Esterman, who was a mashpia and Timchet Mimim in Lubavitch, told over that he heard this nigun from a very old man who was in the group, in the choir of the Alter Rebbe. who sang for the Alter Rebbe. And this old man told over that when he was a very young man, he was blind and he couldn't see. He was blind. And his father brought him to the Alter Rebbe, to the Ozna, to ask for a bracha. He came to the Alter Rebbe and he asked the Alter Rebbe for the bracha. The Alter Rebbe opened up the Sefer HaZohar, the book of the Zohar, and he instructed the boy to read from inside. In the beginning, he says, I couldn't see anything. I only saw blurry letters. So the Alter Rebbe rebuked him strongly, and he said, read loudly. And my eyes were opened, and I started reading like anybody else, just like any other person. My father left me in the Ozna by the Alter Rebbe, and because I had a tremendous talent in singing, he was attached to the Alter Rebbe's choir. And at that time, he heard the Dveikus Nigun of the Alter Rebbe, Ke'ayol Tarik. The Nigun goes like this, Ke'ayol Tarik, Alafikei Moyim. And the second part is, V'hoyu l'toitofos b'nei necho. It's not the pasuk. The pasuk is Ke'ayol Tarik Alafikei Moyim, like a ayol is a type of deer that calls out by the water, right? And it's about the neshama. The David describes how the neshama goes out with klois nefesh, with a rotzu to godliness. What's v'hoyel l'tofes b'nei necha? V'hoyel l'tofes b'nei necha is putting out tefillin. So he goes on. He heard this nigun of the Ke'ayol Tarik of the Alter Rebbe. He heard it from the Alter Rebbe himself, who sang it very often with great dveikus. And the Chassid, the Shmuel Greunem, that we just mentioned, the Mashpi and Lubavitch explained the connection between the psukim of Ke'ayol Tarik and v'hoyel l'tofes. One is a pasuk in Tillim, and one is a pasuk in Kriya Shema. And he explained it as follows. Ke'ayol Tarik is the idea of rotzu, the idea of the neshama expiring in its desire to go up to godliness. And then comes v'hoyel l'tofes, which is the mitzvah of tefillin, which is the inyan of shuv, of the returning, which means drawing down godliness down here. As is known that the whole idea of tefillin is to draw down the mechin, the celestial intellect, powers of intellect, the Eres Elikim, the godly attributes of mechin, into the world. So the Alter Rebbe, in his dveikis, through this nigun, Ki ayol taroig alafikei moyim v'hoyu l'toitofos b'nei necha, encapsulated the whole idea of Ratzah v'Shoiv. And if you look, just to sum up, what's the tachlis? You know, there's the famous machlekes between Rambam and Ramban. What is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is, when Mashiach comes, that there will be the Neshamas in Gan Eden. Everybody agrees there's going to be Tchias HaMeis into the resurrection, but what's the ultimate state? So the Ramban says the ultimate state is, after the resurrection, all the Neshamas go back up to Gan Eden. The Neshamas leave the body. The Rambam, that's what the Rambam says. That's what the Rambam says, I believe. And the Ramban says, no, it's the other way around. That the ultimate goal is, the ultimate state is Dafke Neshama Beguf, a Neshama in a body. That goes, and Chassidus paskins like that the ultimate state is Dafke the Neshama in the body. Why? What's the ultimate inyan? What's the ultimate kavona? What's the shuv, the returning? The Rebbe says in a Maimer, in Zos Chukas Hatorah, concerning the previous Rebbe, that a Rebbe has in him two aspects. He's got the Rebbe dimension as a private individual, and then he has the idea of a Rebbe as he is a Reya, the shepherd of his flock, which is the Pnimius, which is the essential aspect of the Rebbe. The essential aspect of the Rebbe is the fact that he is the shepherd of his flock. That is why when it came to Parah Aduma, which is what we're learning now, for Moshe Rabbeinu, he says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Zos Vayedaber Shem al Moshe, Zos Chukas Hatorah. So the question is asked, Chukah we know is a mitzvah that you don't understand the reason. We know that the Eibishter revealed the reason for Parah Aduma to Moshe Rabbeinu, right? So why was it considered a Chukah from Moshe? So the Rebbe explains, because Moshe Rabbeinu's essential point, being the Rebbe of Klal Yisrael, was that he was connected to the Yidden, and the Yidden, Am Yisrael, the Bnei Yisrael, did not know the reason for Parah Aduma. So because they don't know the reason for Parah Aduma, Moshe Rabbeinu is also lacking that. Because his essential point is what? The fact that he's connected to Yidden. And the Rebbe says over there, that means that when it comes to the Yortzeit of a Tzaddik, it doesn't mean that, of course we know that in the Yortzeit of a Tzaddik, he goes from one madrega, from one level to a higher level and a higher level. So what happens to us? He leaves us down here. So he says, no. First of all, we're connected to him, so we go up together with him. But mostly, and second of all, we know that it's that, as the Alter Rebbe explains in the Keres HaKodesh and so on and so forth, that the tzaddik continues to be mashpia from his inspiration to those that are connected to him. And Adrabah, he says, on the contrary, the main nekuda of the Rebbe is that he continues to affect and be connected with his flock down here, the shuv. So all of these ideas go along together with this concept that the Alter Rebbe expresses. So fundamentally, that ultimately the tachlis is the shuv, the doing the mitzvah, the being connected to down here. So therefore, even though today, of course, today is the stalkers of the Alter Rebbe, and he's going from one madrega to another madrega. In fact, in one of the stories, it's told that the Alter Rebbe said, "What do you think when you come up there? You're going to find me? You won't find me." But nevertheless, being that he is a Rebbe and he's connected to Chassidim, and we are connected to him, and we do that through learning his Torah and following in his footsteps and fulfilling his instructions, so that connection certainly continues, and the hashpah certainly continues, and dafke over here, lamata, in the physical body, the Eibusher will help from us going gichim, we should have it, kipshute, in actual fact of Mashiach Tzidkenu.